Sure. So, as I'm sure everyone is aware, the township and the property
This is
owner
Wildflower Farm.
have some outstanding disputes related to the use of the property located at 8 Castle Bar Lane. That includes an outstanding notice of violation and the property owner's appeal of that notice, as well as a pending citation for failure to obtain a public exposition permit. Through conversation with counsel for the property owner and with the board, we have come up with a settlement agreement that is proposed and provided to the board for their approval. My understanding is that the property owner has agreed to these terms already.
Could you outline the salient points of the agreement?
I can do so. In exchange for the withdrawal of the public exposition citation, as well as the notice of violation for the Mother's Day, whatever you want to call it, the township and the property owner have agreed to certain interpretations of the zoning ordinance, advertisements, parking issues, as well as the payment of a $300 payment in lieu of the payment of a fine for the public exposition permit. This does not include the appeal of a stormwater-related notice of violation. That will still proceed. But within 2 business days of the full execution of this agreement, both parties have certain obligations to withdraw certain things, and I assume that those will occur.
May I have a motion?
Oh, are we taking questions on that yet? Done there, been there, done that, and got it out, but just asking a question.
I'll accept a motion to approve the settlement agreement between the township and Ryan and so, and I will second that. Now, is there any public question or comment?
Did any of the settlement?
Could you please identify yourself?
Very good. Frank Outer,
Address?
1 Castle Bar Lane, Malvern, PA.
Thank you.
There was reports of work being done on the property without a building permit. Is that part of the settlement?
No, but not. This only has to do with the notice of violation related to the use of the property and the public exposition.
I think it's next door to them that does a lot of
It was
work.
part of the settlement. Could you repeat that, the very first thing when you started?
I don't remember what the first thing I said was.
Is this the guy that built
Had to do with
the police
property.
station and is on the planning
The
commission?
settlement agreement details or includes the Board of Supervisors and the Heenan's interpretation and understanding of what the zoning ordinance allows or requires.
Now, as you know, there is a major issue with that between the neighbors and the Heenans. Is this agreement that you guys have made that has to do with the property use, is that going forward, or is this something, the event of the past?
I'm not sure I follow your question.
You said that there's been an agreement between the township and the property owner regarding the property use.
And this is the guy on the planning commission?
There's a major disagreement with other property owners and the property use.
You mean
My
other
question
property
is,
owners have been
did your
tools?
agreement previously made by this we're talking about here, did that settle everything for the future, or are you settling past events?
This settles past events and delineates what our interpretation of going forward, so that way both parties understand and are aware of the position taken.
You happen to know, and is it okay to ask if the neighbor's attorney is privy to this agreement?
He is not. A
doesn't have to
settlement agreement
be.
is not a public record until it is approved.
And I guess I'm repeating myself to say, I'm asking, is it clear that whatever agreement you've made, you set up what guidelines for the future, but it's still, do we as neighbors agree with those guidelines? Will we get a chance to comment on those guidelines?
Well, it's really just the interpretation of the ordinance.
It's not up to you,
Through the
dude.
settlement agreement, we can't allow a property owner to do more than what our ordinance allows. So it's a delineation of what the ordinance requires.
Seems to be an awful lot of opinions on what is the agreement and what is in the ordinance. And all I could suggest is that our attorney, if some agreement is being made between the two that you don't think we're gonna go with, he should be involved with it before this gets voted in.
It's none of your business.
That's understandable. There is the private enforcement action that the neighbors have brought against them that covers your interpretation of the ordinance. That has nothing to do with us, and this has nothing to do with that. So you can continue to prosecute
You
that.
can continue to try to sue your neighbors for having a wildflower farm, Mr.
And
Howder.
we've had this discussion before, but for the record, it's nice if the neighbors get along. We really want to get along.
No, you don't want to
And
get
I think you
along,
guys-
because if you wanted to
the
get
township
along, none of this
is
would have
setting us
happened.
up for trouble. I've said this at a previous meeting. I want to
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
We do want to get along.
And that's my
We're not
opinion.
happy with some things, and I think you guys are not giving us the best case to get along. With that said, I have no more questions.
Thank you.
I would like to say the township is not trying to take sides in this matter.
That
We had an enforcement action, we had a citation that related to the Mother's Day, and I'll use the word event in lowercase in quotes. I'm not using it as a legal term in any way, shape, or form. There were a lot of things that were related to that are involved in the neighbors' needs. This does not do anything other than say, this is what we agree with the Heenans, what the ordinance says and means. It does not change anything in your actions. In any way,
So if
shape,
you
or
all
form.
want to be Scrooge
Yes,
neighbors
says
for Christmas,
This is
go
what we
for it.
both agree the ordinance means. It doesn't extend it in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't reduce it in any way, shape, or form. It just gives a clarity of definition in terms of where the township is with the Heenans.
And that's a private, we're not, you can't read what you guys have agreed to.
Once it's approved, you can.
Once it's approved. Because we have, properly speaking, we haven't agreed to it until we approve it.
I love how these neighbors don't seem to think the Heenans have rights.
This is not, let's say.
And
it's
that
not
guy, I
an
think,
unusual thing to
oh
do
my
in
God,
circumstances
never mind.
like this. To a certain extent, what this is doing, is getting the township out of the middle. Because we shouldn't be there.
I have a question.
I'm sorry.
I have a question.
Yes, I'm sorry, David, address it.
West Green to Castle Bar Lane.
Here we go.
The interpretation that was just brought up. Once it's approved, once the board approves it, this will be public knowledge and be put in the minutes.
So the approval of the settlement agreement will be put in the minutes. If you'd like a copy of the agreement, you can submit a right to know request to the township, and it's a public record, and it would be.
But it'll be in the minutes.
The other question is what is the purpose of having, if the township doesn't take a stand on interpretation, what are the remedies that as a neighbor can do?
I think
So the
what I
desperate
just said is
housewives
that
of Castle Bar
the
Lane
township is-
apparently still have
is
problems with a
taking a stand on
wildflower farm.
interpretation, saying, this is what the Heenans believed, this is what the township believed. We worked out the wording of a mutually agreed definition of what the ordinance means. You're perfectly within your rights to continue your action, I presume part of the action, with the Heenans. You can say the interpretation is good, bad, or indifferent, but the township is not the party that you're dealing with. You're dealing with the Heenans. Here's an agreed definition. That's where you are. We're not taking a stand one versus the other. We're simply saying, this is what we understand with the Heenans that the ordinance means and says.
And just to be clear, the interpretation of the zoning ordinance that is delineated here doesn't necessarily just apply to the Heenans. It applies to every similar property within the township.
Correct.
Thank you. That's it.
Oh, here comes my favorite neighbor.
Yeah, I'm Brett Snyder with 4 Castle Barley. Just 2 things. You said that you delineated what could happen in the future. Could you summarize that? And then the second part of the ask is, you said you mutually agree. Why would you mutually agree if the law is the law?
Well, you can't make an agreement that isn't mutual by definition.
Well, why would it be mutual if the law is the law?
Because some people say, well, the law allows me to do this, and we might say the law does not.
So if you disagree with something, where did it land?
It landed in the form of an agreement to which our council and the board of supervisors said, yeah.
There's nothing in this settlement agreement that permits them, like I said before, that permits them to do more than what the township has interpreted our ordinance to allow. This is the township's interpretation of what is permitted.
Could you summarize the delineation that you said going forward, or is it a little too long?
It's a couple pages, but it really focuses on some of the specifics of how the 50% requirement is met, what can be advertised, what sort of events require a public exposition permit. So it gives more specific parameters for when those would be implicated.
I'm sorry.
I don't necessarily want to get into specifics right now because it hasn't been approved by.
Sure, I get it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, the post sometimes block. Forgive me if I'm not happy.
If I may not to belabor, but you just alluded to public events requiring a permit.
Right.
So, can you explain what that is?
Well, we have an ordinance that requires you to get a permit if you have a public exposition.
Is there a frequency at which one can have public,
The rights of the heathens to have a public exposition were exactly equal to every single other property owner. in the
You just
township.
don't like it because you don't
So
want
we are
it
not
on your street.
limiting- we're
But it's not
saying,
on your
oh,
street,
you
it's on their
can't have
farm.
more than X or Y number of expositions. We're saying. you
Can't
have to
decide
go
if
for
you
a
people
permit.
are Stepford
And
or
that
Desperate
is a requirement
Housewives.
that everybody has to comply with. And that right is equal to anybody in the township. So if you're living up on Bryan Avenue, if you want to have a block party, which they oftentimes do up there, they are required to get a public exposition permit. They are also required, because those permits are granted by the police department. The police department will say, you're expecting a lot of people to be walking on, I'm talking about Bryan Avenue block parties. You're requiring to have a lot of people on the street. We will require you to block the street and have traffic control because you've got people on the street, so forth. The police set those parameters. But everybody has the right to have public exposition. As it's defined in the ordinance.
I think I could speak for a lot of people in the township that the matter of having a frequently, what was the word you used, frequent public exposition. People can have those, but when there gets to be a certain number, it becomes something more than.
If you've ever gone to
And
Wildflower
that's gotta
Farm,
be part of.
they don't bother
the
anybody.
law. We're not addressing that issue here, because if we were to come up with an agreement with the heathens to say that the ordinance applicable to everybody means this, and we're to limit them to a number, whatever it is, then everybody would be limited. We would be legislating through an agreement, through a private agreement, which is not what we're doing. We're simply saying, this is what the ordinance means.
Well,
How would a neighbor deal with the frequency? A little hypothetical. How would a neighbor deal with the frequency if the frequency was, it's a relative term, high? But people in general say, wow, that is pretty high for a.
I wonder, do they have the same problem when Radnor Hunt
Neighbors deal with that issue.
puts the follow cars on their street?
There are a
Because it
number of
comes
different
through there
alternatives would
sometimes.
be to come in here and say, these folks are having a public exposition, every even numbered day in the calendar, and it's chaos, and we would again have to talk to people about that. But as it stands right now, everybody's got the right to have a public exposition. And, obviously if it becomes abused in some fashion, then we'd have to address it. But I would think that the police department would start saying, wait a minute, how many of these are you planning to have? Because we have to bring on extra police officers, we've got to do all kinds of things to deal with the potential issue. But this does not change the ordinance or ordinances. It's simply a statement of what the parties agree the ordinance means.
But you see, these neighbors don't like this.
And Frank, just to clarify something, if the use of the property, of any property in Willistown Township, becomes an event space where public exposition is occurring all the time, then it's likely that the primary use of that property has changed from what's permitted under the zoning ordinance. And that would be subject to zoning action under uses permitted. But if it's not the principal use, if there are other uses, then a public exposition is permitted anywhere, really.
Yeah. And really the issue that was, primarily in front of us in these discussions is the farm use, which is protected under state law. And, what constitutes farm use, defining the 50% requirement, which was no question in a lot of people's minds, things of that nature.
Well, I think speaking for the neighbors, but myself, I think I speak for them. It has to do certainly with the frequency of I'm going to use to locate events. Let's call it what it is. If it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, it must be a duck. So
that means if we say you're a big fat jerk, you're a big fat jerk.
Is,
okay, good.
Speaking for myself, major concern. Thanks for your time. I'll belabor the rest.
Thank you.
Waving your hand.
Yeah, people are gesticulating, and I'm going to start with Mr. Heenan Senior here, and then you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you identify yourself and your address, please?
731. So, so that I can be clear also for, the agreement in essence is an acknowledgement of the property owner in the township.
Excuse me. Please, thank you.
An acknowledgement of the property owner in the township. This is the interpretation of the zoning ordinance. And they both agreed to that. So that is the township's position. So I would hopefully like to see, if there's any clarification that the neighbors need, by all means, they should look at that. But this is the township's interpretation. And hopefully that will also allow them to stop sort of the barrage of, misunderstanding about certain things.
Wow, you're being
Mr.
kind.
Howard,
They've been
June
horrible
meeting,
to the Heenans.
a public statement that is not negotiating, it's either right or it's wrong. It's fair enough. I think this is an agreement that says this is what's right. This is what the township says is right. So hopefully you'll acknowledge that and leave it be. You're
Okay, Frank.
Thank you.
We're not going to get into a cross country.
No.
I just.
Fair enough, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
If we could do agreements that would reduce misunderstandings, we'd be doing them every day, but sadly that doesn't all work. Yes, ma'am.
Lonnie Gray, non-Castle Party. So back in January, I called Mr. Smiley and asked several times after that, please don't be
I'm sorry, as far as recording is concerned, first of all, this meeting is being recorded through the Zoom, and people are free to record these meetings as they are public meetings. We have asked in the past where people are recording the meetings is to let people know, generally, because it's a courtesy, and some people may choose not to speak if they know they're being recorded. However, we are on Zoom and it is being recorded regardless.
All right, I called Mr. Smiley in January, and I called several times asking specifically to have the ordinance explained to me. And I never got an answer. Never got an answer from Mr. Smiley, never got an answer from the township. I mean, clearly wanting to understand and have the ordinance explained in detail. So can you answer why why that answer was never given to me? Why it was never explained?
This isn't about you, lady.
I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer for
I
you.
asked several times.
Again, I don't have an answer for you. The
God, these
ordinance
people are
is
horrible.
there.
It's
In
how many
the,
days before
in the ordinance
Christmas?
book on the website. I can't speak to why you didn't receive an answer from Mr. Smiley. But here we are today.
Well, it would have been nice to have that.
It would have been appropriate.
It would have been lovely. Maybe you should come over for
I mean,
tea.
some of this could have been avoided. If
Really?
the township had done that with the neighbors so that we all were on the same page, so we understood what your interpretation was, and it was something that we could.
On that note, I will say that there was a letter in March that interpreted the ordinance that has been appealed by the neighbors. So the township's position was known at that point, and the neighbors appealed that.
Shocking.
Just want to be clear.
Specific and
Thank you. Have we any other comments or questions? Call the question. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the settlement agreement, say aye. Aye. Thank you very much.
Yay!
Now money.